Hey everybody, it's Mike. I wanted to give a couple of prefaces to today's episode before we get into our conversation with Michael Roth about Affair on 8th Avenue. The first is that we now know who that song was written about. When Michael and I were talking, I did not know who the object of the song was, but since then, I've learned on some online research that Marin Thomas was her name. She was an actress. She was a star of an influential underground film called Sins of the Fleshopoids from 1965. So I wanted to let you know that fast breaking news, we did find out who the song was written for. Also wanted to let you know that since our last episode, I've opened a shop on Etsy that features the logo of the podcast on several different items of swag that you might want to take a look at. Let me give you the URL for it. It's etsy.com/shop/CHR podcast store. Let me give that to you one more time. etsy.com/shop/CHR podcast store. I hope you'll visit, and I hope you'll check out some of our items. Okay, happy listening.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
The perfume that she wore was from some little store on the downside of town, and it lingered on long after she'd gone. I remember it well. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates Gordon Lightfoot's music song by song, a proud member of the That's Not Canon podcast network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan from Panama City, Florida, Michael Roth. Michael, I know we've been talking about this for a long time, so welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm glad to be here. It was very nice of you to invite me.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you. So, since this is your first visit with us, I have to ask you the hazing question, which is, how did you first get into Lightfoot's music?
Well, I think my first exposure, when I was in grade school, I was a fan of Peter, Paul, and Mary, because, this was the Puff of the Magic Dragon days. But they did In the Early Morning Rain. And it wasn't until high school that I started learning guitar and really getting into that. But from the Peter, Paul, and Mary songbook, they had the tablature to In the Early Morning Rain. So that was like one of the first songs that I learned, and I really liked that song a lot. But what really made me a fan of Lightfoot was, If You Could Read My Mind, which came out during that period of high school days. I don't know what that was, the 60s, I guess. I don't know what year that was. Anyway, I was very attracted to him, the poetry of the lyrics in that song, which I think is really one of his top 2 or 3 songs, really, in terms of craftsmanship and just the beauty of the song and the structure of it. I was a Gordon Lightfoot fan from, among many other songwriters that I loved, but he was definitely one of the big influences on me. The energy of his songs, his voice is great.
What is it more generally that you like about his music? You've mentioned the 2 songs that really hit you when you were in high school, but if you could sum it up, what do you like about Lightfoot's music?
Well, I like the energy of his songs. I like the sound of his voice. He just seems to have a way of really engaging the listener into what he's talking about. The interesting stories that he comes up with, those are the things. Of course, he had a lot of competition back then. We had someone that was like the era of, it was interesting. I was just watching, If You Could Read My Mind, the documentary of Lightfoot, and they talk a lot about that, how there was all this interaction between Dylan, which he became friends with, of course, and of course Dylan influenced everybody, changed things for everybody. And then the Beatles, of course. It was just an era of great stuff, and it really spurred him to start really writing and to write better songs. Personally, he kind of reminds me of John Denver, who was, I think, an underappreciated singer-songwriter. They both have those clear, strong voices and great melodies, but they didn't really get the real recognition they deserved. Although Lightfoot did achieve some real status there, not just in Canada, but in the United States, which was amazing. I think that was one of the things that really made him stand out was, as a Canadian writer, he was able to, compete head-to-head with American songwriters.
Well, you mentioned John Denver, and the two of them did have a bit of a relationship. And I think there are some certain similarities between the kind of work that they did. Lightfoot didn't get as lampooned quite as much as John Denver did, but both enormous talents, musically, both vocally and instrumentally. Have you seen Lightfoot live, and what was the experience like?
Well, a long time ago, and honestly, I don't remember when or specifically where it was, but it was in a gym, I think at a university at Georgetown. And it was just him and Red Shea. It wasn't like one of these huge auditoriums or anything, but it was pretty packed, and I wasn't too far from him. And I thought it was just very interesting. Of course, I was just there, as a fan and just enjoying it. So whatever he was going to do was probably be what I liked. One of the things that struck me was how short he was. I didn't realize he's not like a midget or anything, and I'm not a big person either. So I always appreciate that when I see somebody who's not 6'4", and Right. And what else really impressed me? I think I mentioned that Red Shea, his backup guitarist, I really noticed him at that. Just the way he was able to carry the whole orchestration of the song with just a guitar. That was really impressive. He obviously had good tastes in side musicians.
Oh, absolutely. And he's always taken a lot of pride in the backup bands that he's had. So no question about that. Have you had the pleasure of meeting Lightfoot yet?
No, I never have actually shook his hand or talked to him, even though I probably could have when I saw him in concert. But I was kind of a shy person and didn't usually do that sort of thing, and wouldn't even know what to say. It's like, oh, I like your stuff,
Yeah, I mean, that kind of says it all, and there's probably nothing we could say to him that wouldn't be a cliche to some degree or another.
Yeah.
Well, today we're talking about Affair on 8th Avenue, and I was curious, this is a song that is very pretty, but it is describing something that a lot of people probably don't consider to be a good thing. So I guess what I'm wondering is, why did you enjoy the song? Why did you want to talk about it today?
Well, in looking through his songs, that one I had never heard before. And when I listened to it, I was struck by how pretty it was. I mean, that's one of the things that I like Denver. He is really able to come up with these gorgeous melodies, just one after the other. And this was definitely one of them. And most of his songs are very energetic. He was really into that, driving rhythm thing. So this was a little different. I mean, there are other songs of his that are soft and delicate, but this was one, they're not as common, I think, as more like the driving story songs. And I liked the poetry of it, I liked the way the story was told. I just thought it was a beautiful song. Maybe I'll get a chance to learn it someday. I don't play covers right, myself very often. Although I keep telling myself I should, because that's what everybody wants.
Yeah, sure.
But that would be one I would do. That's the thing is when I did covers, and when I do them now, I'd probably pick the ones that nobody heard, so they wouldn't know the difference between the original songs.
Clever. Okay.
I mean, I'm not in order to do that, but just that instead of picking the top hits, I'd be picking some obscure thing that they never heard. So.
Right. Yeah. Not trying to steal somebody else's thunder, but on the other hand, they're going to tune in and say, "Oh, I haven't heard this before," as opposed to something you've heard on the radio over and over again. I think for me, it's a stark recollection of what apparently actually happened, kind of a tawdry affair. It's very simple. It's very beautiful, and he manages to not be cliche about it. I mean, there's no, illusions about, okay, this is forever love, or this is the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me. And he remembers it so vividly that in less than 3 minutes, he really did tell the whole story. I mean, he could have probably written a novel about this thing, but in less than 3 minutes, he's said everything that needed to be said about the relationship. One commenter on YouTube said, "This song makes me remember something that never happened to me."
Yeah.
And that kind of says it all.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and that is a really great quote.
Yeah. Without trying to delve too much into your personal life, do you have any anecdotal stories about the song?
Well, I tried researching this song, and it's really difficult to find anything. And it was dropped from his album when it first came out. And I kind of think that, I mean, he talks about, now about wishing he had never done That's What You Get for Loving Me.
Right.
He feels embarrassed about it. And I kind of think that maybe he was feeling that about this song at the time. And since, it was never, as far as I know, it got really promoted or anything. So I do think it really was a little more confessional than maybe he retrospectively intended, but
yeah, I think you're right. And he hasn't performed it very much in his repertoire. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Is there a good setting for you to listen to this? Could you listen to it anytime, any place, any kind of weather, or do you feel like the best setting to listen to it would be in a certain place, a certain time, certain climate, whatever?
Well, I think it's a song, if it came on the radio, you wouldn't turn it off. But, driving through a snowstorm, it might be a nice song to listen to. Something where, you don't have a lot of distractions around. You're not going to want to get up and dance.
Oh, no.
No, you want to sit and listen to it and think about those words and, what he's trying to say and everything. I don't know if it's totally confessional, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, we will. I think for me, I always think of the beginning of it being on a rainy day, and if it were a movie, you'd have the camera giving this external shot of this building on 8th Avenue in New York City, and they kind of close in on a window, and through the window you see Gordon and this woman.
Yeah.
But it would be upstairs. I mean, it wouldn't be on the ground floor. So that's where my mind always goes when I hear this song. And so that's why I think on a day like today, when we're recording in Northern California, it is raining.
Yeah.
Fairly hard.
Ooh.
And I did listen to Lightfoot on the way home from work today, and I'll probably play this song a little bit later because it's just the perfect setting for it, for my own psyche. But yeah, researching the song, I found out a couple of things. Lightfoot did meet this woman at the Cellar Door in Washington, D.C., which was a club where he was playing with Red and I guess with John Stockfish. He found out that she was a waitress at the Playboy Club in New York City. And during that tour, or maybe at the end of the tour, he spirited away from his bandmates and flew up to New York to see her. And the two of them had a rendezvous in her apartment. It's not clear whether she was married. We know that he was. And so he was the one having the affair, although we both know it takes two to tango. That's all I could find out. Did I miss anything?
No, that was, I probably read the same thing you did. And in some ways, what this reminds me of is there's a song by Leonard Cohen called Chelsea Hotel, I think. That's, in a sense, a parallel about an affair. Of course, that was with a famous person. I guess she's dead, so we can say Janis Joplin apparently was the person. It's, of course, a very, very different kind of scenario. This is just somebody who is alluring just because of who she is, not because of any accoutrements of fame or notoriety or fortune or talent, as we know.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, the woman that Gordon apparently had the affair with, if she's come forward and said, hey, that song was about me, I haven't found it, and I think we probably would have known by now.
Right.
We'll be right back to our conversation with Michael Roth about Affair on 8th Avenue. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Is that song really a cover? What instrument are they playing there? What do those crazy lyrics mean? If you're the kind of person who thinks about stuff like that, you're in luck because I've got just the podcast for you. How Good It Is chooses a single song each episode and takes a dive into the story behind the song and the artist who made it famous. I'm Claude Call. You can find me in your favorite podcast software or just point your browser to howgooditis.com.
How good it is.
Hello, I'm JT, a lifelong student of the paranormal and the unexplained. I've spent over 35 years researching and learning about a wide range of subjects, from UFOs and cryptids to ghosts and the supernatural, from hidden and lost treasures to mankind's mysterious past, and all other things mysterious and Fortean. Each week I'll bring you some relevant and interesting articles in this genre, as well as a different topic. Some you may be familiar with, but many you most likely will never have known existed. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, and let me be your tour guide as we explore the unexplained on the Paranormal Son.
I think what's alluring about the song, though, is that it's just that she is just a person who, in and of herself, her very nature is something that's mysterious and attractive. And that's what he's trying to capture.
And he does a beautiful job of it. And that's probably a good jumping off place for us to get into the lyrics now. The perfume that she wore was from some little store on the downside of town, which to me kind of implies that it was cheap perfume. This is not Chanel number 5 or whatever. And it lingered on long after she'd gone. I remember it well. And we know that odor is one of the most powerful memory triggers. I mean, psychologists have said this. So it's possible that he smelled it in different contexts years later in a different part of the world. He smells the same perfume and thinks, oh my gosh, my mind's going back to this place in New York City. And she showed me her treasures of paper and tin. And I can't figure out what kind of treasures would be made of those two. Do you have any ideas about what he's talking about?
Back in those days, that was the 70s, it was real countercultural things. So I know I lived in Santa Fe back then, and so the counterculture was very strong there. There was, part of the community, the Easy Rider people were there. Mm-hmm. And so you had, all kinds of handmade art things and so on. And I think what the key to this is they're treasures of paper and tin. It doesn't matter really what they were. It's that she treasured them. I know people made things out of tin, like little candle stands and things like that, so you had all manner of things and knickknacks that you'd find. There was a place in Santa Fe that sold Mexican art. And so you'd have all these little knickknacks and things that were very cheaply made and everything. But they're curious. They're curios, Yeah. And I think that's what it was, But I think the key to it is that she made them valuable by
which is, so treasure. The personal pronoun, her treasures.
Yes.
Is the operative thing there. Okay. Yeah. And we played a game only she could win. And it made me think that she doesn't have as much invested in what's going on here as he does. If she isn't married, she isn't cheating on anyone. He is married, so he's cheating on Brita. He probably feels a little bit of remorse about it. You mentioned the idea of being confessional, which implies that you're coming clean about something. She kind of comes out of it relatively unscathed. So when you think about the game, I think he's probably speaking metaphorically here, because he doesn't mention, we sat down, we played chess like they did in the Thomas Crown affair or whatever.
No, it was the game of love, and that's, I think he was speaking of it metaphorically as a game. I don't think they were actually playing a game. But I think there are some people who are just, they're in charge of their lives, people like Lightfoot who were, had achieved so much. I don't know that he had as much control of his life as she did. She could choose who to be with or not. It wasn't like something was going to happen, the opportunities were going to open up for her or something like that. She was happy with her life. She was content with who she was. And I think that that's like where the real power is. It's like a magical power in a way. So she didn't need him. That's the key to it, I think, is she didn't need him, but he wanted her.
I like the way you said this idea of she has some sort of a choice, whereas clearly he's there of his own volition also with her, but he's also got obligations to the guys in the band. He's got contracts he needs to meet. I mean, she's at the Playboy Club, which I guess was something of a prestige item in those days, but it's not like she couldn't walk away from it and find a waitressing job some other place.
Right.
And then a little later on, he says, and she told me a riddle I'll never forget, and she left with the answer I've never found yet. How long, said she, can a moment like this belong to someone? And I wonder about this. I think, is she implying that this isn't going to last long? She knows that this is a one-night stand, and she kind of saying, look, this is after today, you're going to be going back to where you were, and we're both going to go on with our life. Did you have any thoughts on that particular part of the song?
Yeah, I think in its essence, you have, somebody who's saying, I'm not here to try to establish a relationship with you. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm happy. This is just something, everything in life is fleeting. The nature of life is fleeting. So if we can have some pleasure in this, let's do it. If not, then you're free to leave. I think that's really what it comes down to. I do find these lines to be a mixture of really nice poetry and some sort of, I think like faux profundity, in a sense. Some of the lines, when you're writing a song, sometimes you write something that sounds really neat, but doesn't really mean anything, And I think that there's a little touch of this here. He's trying to create a riddle that makes us think about these things. And if he narrowed it down to just, how can anyone own a moment? How can a moment like this belong to someone? How can you hold on to a moment, a passing thing? It's very Japanese, in a sense, like the samurai, the fleeting nature of life, You can't hold on to it, you have to flow with it. And that's as close as you're going to get to it. And the line, though, about we must almost be born, I think that's a little stretch. I think he was trying a little too hard to sound really deep. To me, it just kind of sounded a little off. But somebody else might have some great insight into that I'm not getting. I just thought he was trying to be a songwriter and write something really cool.
Attention, Carefree Highway listeners, please be in touch with me at the address I'll give you at the end of the show if you've got an insight into this. Yeah, I couldn't figure out what that line meant either. It's a nice way of rounding out that particular verse, but it's really inscrutable. I really don't know if he was saying.
I think inscrutable is right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if you should ask me what secrets I hide, I'm only your lover, don't make me decide. Now, that kind of implies that this woman has a lot of secrets. That the implication is, okay, you have to choose what secrets I'm supposed to be saying. Maybe about other lovers she's had, maybe about something other that's kind of sordid from her past. Does it have to do with maybe not keeping the secret of her tryst with Gordon? Well, we know that apparently this remains a secret. Gordon certainly never said anything about it. And I think now we're coming up on 55 years since this happened, and no one has come forward that I know of and said, okay, it was me. But it does bring up the question, is there an answer to the riddle? And I think you kind of touched on that. How long can it belong to us? Yeah. It doesn't seem like it's a riddle as much as it is a rhetorical question, meaning, of course, we can't hold on to this moment. It's going to be passing and it'll be over in a matter of hours and you'll be on your way.
Right. And I think, what she's saying is trying to find my secrets isn't really going to deliver anything of great value to you. Don't think about that. It's like you're taking yourself away from the moment. Here we are together. That's the important thing. Focus,
Okay. Well, yeah. And I don't know how much encouragement he would have needed, but it's a story for another day, I suppose.
Yeah, true.
Well, the song originally was on Back Here on Earth. It was his fourth original album. It came out in 1968. It was the 8th track on the record, and I think it was the second song on the B side. You mentioned that it was not high energy, although it's certainly a beautiful song, but predictably it was not released as a single. The album went to number 21 in Canada, and that was the highest he'd done up to that time on the Canadian charts, or tied for it. It did not chart here in the US or in the UK or in Australia or in New Zealand. And I know that there were 2 recordings of this. We'll discuss that in a second or two. But what's your favorite musical aspect of the song?
It's such a beautiful melody, and the way it rolls got a very lilting feeling to it. You're talking about the kind of the edge of the cusp of the folk era where you still had a lot of these old melodies, around, and he still carried that within him, that kind of tune, and it made it modern enough. But I think that's really the attraction. In the old days, people would just be singing a song, so everything was the melody.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it was for me. Plus, it has the color of it. See, like blue and black and, and dark colors, but with the hints of light around. Not quite Van Gogh's Starry Night, but, something along those lines. I think of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks at the Diner. That's a little too bright.
I mean, if you're having an affair, it's probably not something you want to have. I mean, although I like that
Yeah.
image, and I love that painting. But I think I know the kind of message you're kind of saying here.
It's maybe that neighborhood, though.
Oh, yeah. It might be like around the corner, just outside the border of the painting. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think there were two things that I really loved about this. The simple lead that Red Shea played at the beginning of the song, that, which was just, it's very, very simple, but it was just a perfect, and it descended so that, I don't know if this was conscious or not, but it brings you down to earth by the fact that it's descending, and also it's not trying to be overly complicated.
Right.
And then the other thing that I loved was the chord progression. It's been many, many years since I've played it, but I believe it goes from E minor to D to A minor to B minor to C major 7.
Yeah.
And I love that chord change from the B minor into the C major 7, which is kind of a jazzy chord. Right. But I've used it in that transition in some of the stuff that I've written too. So, I really enjoyed that.
Well, he has a way of in a simple melody, he'll have a way of interjecting a different chord that just kind of, it's startling in a way, but it's also, it makes you remember the song, in a lot of ways. Although I can't really think of one of them that he'll do that. He'll just bring in a different chord change than the usual pattern. So it's a little unexpected. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of a good songwriter, is that it brings in the unexpected. Also a good lyricist, which he does that here too.
Oh, absolutely. And you talked about unexpected chords. I mean, he throws in an F chord in the chorus, so to speak, which was a neat little change also. So, I mean, those are two examples just in the same song of the kind of thing that we're talking about. I liked the steel guitar that was on the Gord's Gold version of it, but I didn't think the song hung on that particular piece of instrumentation. I thought you could have it or not, that it didn't make the song and it didn't break the song.
Yeah. I'm not an expert at production, and I didn't get a chance to listen to the old version, so I can't compare them, but I think that the spareness of production on this song is a good thing. It's not overly produced. It's not overly done. It's not wall of sound kind of thing,
Oh, yeah. Phil Spector, the saint. Definitely. We'll be right back to our conversation with Michael Roth about Affair on 8th Avenue. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Welcome to Books Boys. Every month, the Dean and PJ tell you all about the books they've been reading and make some recommendations from our old favorites, plus surprise call-ins from authors to talk about the works that they're writing, original music, prize giveaways, and more. That's Books Boys on booksboys.com and all good podcatchers. Books Boys. Get it. Buy it. Books.
Hey, do you like classic albums? Technically, like the 20th century albums, such as like Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones. I've only had Beatle episodes so far, however, I'll be doing more. But welcome to my show, or rather, hey, welcome to check out my show. All those years ago, a classic album podcast with the dipping sauce. As you can see, the George Harrison reference. I review classic albums, not of those the likes of Beethoven, the likes of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and like I mentioned earlier, or what have you. So yeah, check it out. It's every Monday. I do albums, conspiracies, songs, all that jazz. So just check it out. All those years ago, a classic album podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
You talked about the sparseness of it, and on the original, Lightfoot was playing 6-string and vocals, Red Shea was playing lead acoustic, and then John Stockfish was playing bass. So it doesn't get much more stripped down than that. And as we have said, it was also on Gord's Gold, the double LP, but they took it off the CD and it wasn't digitally released until 2010. So when I finally got the CD when I was in college, I noticed that they'd left that song off of the CD. And I thought, wow, why did they take that one off? Now, I understand that in those days, there was only so much room on a CD for anything. And I accept that. But any ideas about why they chose that one to take off rather than something else?
So thinking that maybe that's because on second thought, maybe I shouldn't have done that song, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Maybe he didn't really want to push that song so much.
Mm-hmm. He did rearrange the lyrics a little bit for the re-recording. And I do think that the lyric progression that you have on the Gord's Gold is a better narrative. It feels a little bit more sequential than the lyric arrangement he had on the original recording. He has played the song just a very few times, 10 times altogether. The first one was just up the road from me at the Fillmore West in San Francisco. And then the most recent one was in Lenox, Massachusetts at the Tanglewood Music Center in July of 76. But that's it. He hasn't brought it out since then. And do you think that's because it's too much of a confessional song, or is it because he just has too big a catalog? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, it is both. You know what it's like to put together a set list, and you have your favorites and so on, and you know what people want to hear, and that's another big driver. And so I think, between it's like, oh, do they really want to hear this? Do I really want to play this? You often cut out songs that you really like in favor of the hits, or you have a curve in your performance, dynamics, you want to bring it up and down and up and down. And so you got to pick songs that have a variety of things. And he always struck me as a guy that really favored the driving rhythms. Even if it was folky, it was still very rhythmic, very driving, energetic. So there are all kinds of considerations. I don't know why he did decide those things, but I'm sure it has something to do with that, and possibly because, like I said, he might not have wanted to really promote it after the fact.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. There have been 3 official covers on this. The Brothers Four, that group was mostly known for doing Green Fields, Peter Isaacson, and Michael Thompson. And I'm wondering if you have heard any of those covers and if you have any thoughts on them.
No, I actually haven't. I actually prefer to hear Gordon do his own stuff. Though other people do some nice covers of him, I think he usually does the best. So, I'm not familiar with those. That was kind of almost before my time, really.
Yeah, I have to be confessional here too. It's before my time also, but when I was first getting into folk music, I had a mixtape that I had bought, and the first song on the second side of it was Green Fields, and my dad and I were driving around someplace.
Yeah.
And he said, oh yeah, they played that a lot when Kennedy was assassinated or something. Right. So my only context for that particular thing is what my father, God rest his soul, told me about that particular song. I'm with you that the cover thing, I'm not a huge fan of covers that other people have done of Gordon's songs. That being said, I think if Jon Stewart had been able to cover this before he died, I think he could have done an okay version of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he would want to do a song that was that intimate. And he certainly wouldn't want to talk about something that, because he'd been happily married and was happily married, I think, for about 50 years to Buffy. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, I think his feelings or the way he approaches a song might have been appropriate for this. Any other thoughts on this song? Because I want to talk a little bit about you and your music, but any other thoughts you have on this song before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think this is also pretty important, that songs are fiction. And I remember seeing that in his documentary that they mentioned that, was it Song for a Winter Night, which is like so Canadian, and, so like everybody resonated with that. But it was, I think he wrote it in I think it was a Cleveland apartment or something.
Yes. Yes.
Detroit. I can't remember what it was, like a middle, inner city apartment kind of thing.
In the summer.
In the summer. So he just imagined this thing, and songwriters do that. I mean, that's just kind of the thing is you write, it's basically your imagination that you're using. You might draw on material from your life. You might draw on material from an occurrence or a person, but you are basically making up a story. So the real value of a song is not how much it tells the historical facts, although those can be important for some songs, but it's really how good of a picture did he convey of this feeling of this incident, this encounter, and does it resonate with you in some way emotionally? And that's what you're kind of going for. You're not really trying to recreate every pixel of the room or whatever, the person or the twinkle in their eye and everything, every detail. And you're trying to create an emotion. You're trying to create a scenario. So you embellish, you draw on that, but you don't necessarily tell that story. You tell the story that you want people to hear.
Yeah, and music in its essence is about feeling, and the kind of feeling that you have when you're writing it or performing it is much more important than whether you get the facts straight.
More important than the feeling that the listener has.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, you're also a singer-songwriter. Can you tell us a little bit about your music, what you've been working on recently, and where our listeners can find you both online and in person?
Sure, yeah. So I've been, doing this for, 50 years or so, in different ways, but my singer-songwriter career was mainly interrupted by life for a long time. I did some very interesting things in my life, and they were all worth doing. But I retired about 5 years ago. So since that time, I thought, well, I'm going to, go back and do this because this is what I really want to do. So I have been just an independent singer-songwriter, kind of folk Americana. I've had a lot of songwriting awards, which is nice for contests, and I've had a couple things on the radio, but, nothing by Tim McGraw or anything like that, just my stuff. Right now, I did a major relocation from New Mexico to Panama City, Florida, so I'm getting reintegrated to the community there. I got actually a gig tomorrow at the public library, which is really nice because they're just starting a concert series, and they asked me to kick it off, so that's great. Saturday, I'll be playing at the Dallas Songwriters Association for their awards ceremony because I have a song in that game there. And you can watch it online if you find the Dallas Songwriters Association Saturday starting at noon Central Time. And so various other things like that. You can find me, Michael R.J. Roth, if you can spell that. You can find, michaelrjroth.com or easyheroes.com. And I have a few CDs out that are just guitar vocal things. My latest one is called The Ruins of Our Age. And that's probably a nutshell, I think.
Now, you said you don't do a whole lot of covers, but would you say that Lightfoot has influenced the music that you have done or the style in which you play?
Well, definitely. I mean, it came along at an early time, so he was definitely an influence on the way I kind of approached the song or felt about a song, Like I said, I have, many, many influences, but he was definitely an early one. When the early ones, it's like a language. That's the accent that you adopt, And and strangely enough, he's the person that people most often compare me to vocally, although honestly, I don't hear it. And he is 10 times better singer than I am. So that's always kind of struck me. I thought, well, that's great because I really like Gord Lightfoot. So if I remind them of him, that's great because they obviously like him too. And they said, Johnny Cash or, Leonard Cohen, just somebody gruff, somebody whose voice has been dragged through the dirt. But I mean, his is very pristine and pretty. I'm not. Anyway, that's just a little side thing. Nobody's saying that I'm the second new Gord Lightfoot. I am definitely not. But he was definitely an influence on what I did. I think, like I said, like an early accent. That's the kind of you talk that way because that's what you learned. That's how you learned how to talk. Yeah, I'm having fun and liking it and getting around and playing different places. Virtually, COVID was great for me and for a lot of us because it opened up the internet to us performing. I did a virtual tour around the country, I was playing California about a week ago, and
well, I was playing an hour ago and now I'm playing in Texas or someplace like that. That's fantastic. Well, Michael, we've been talking about this for ages, and I'm glad that we finally got it now committed to a podcast. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time tonight for sharing your thoughts on this song, and I hope we can have you back again sometime real soon.
Well, thank you. It was a real pleasure for me being on here and talking with you. And so, yeah, anytime.
And thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it. Carefree Highway Revisited is on Apple, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you get your listening matter. Our website is www.lightfootpodcast.com. I'd like to make a special request for you to visit my Patreon page. I love this show so much, and I want to keep it going, and you're in a position to help. Please head over to www.patreon.com/carefreehighwayrevisited. $1 or $2 a month is all I ask. You can reach me, Mike Messner, at teachermike72@gmail.com. Well, our next episode will feature my guest Eileen Massover, and she and I will be discussing Gordon's song Restless from the Waiting for You album, and that episode will be coming out in early February. Until then, for Michael Roth, this is Mike Messner reminding you, run for the roses, but don't forget to stop and smell them. We'll see you next time.